I never understood how a simple weekend trip could split a life into a before and an after. But the moment our cars turned off the main highway and entered the long, unmarked forest road, something inside me shifted in a way I only recognized later. The air felt heavier. The trees grew taller, older, closer together, forming a corridor that swallowed sound and made every thought echo louder than it should. Even with 9 friends around me, laughter leaking through open windows, I felt the first quiet warning pressing softly against the back of my mind. The road stretched deeper into the Adirondack wilderness, winding through untouched pine forest that seemed to lean toward us as if listening. Sunlight barely made it through the branches, and when it did, it came in narrow beams that looked less like warmth and more like surveillance. The GPS signal flickered, then died entirely, leaving us with nothing but intuition and a half-remembered set of directions someone had saved weeks earlier. As the forest thickened, the energy inside our group changed. Excitement faded into a strange, restless quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't come naturally to 10 people who know each other well. It didn't feel like boredom or fatigue. It felt like the woods were absorbing everything we were, thinning us out before we even arrived. The cabin appeared suddenly at the end of the road, surrounded by tall grass and framed by a lake so still it looked artificial. A wooden structure from another era, leaning slightly, with a roof darkened by time and storms. No neighbors, no trails leading away. Nothing but trees stacked endlessly behind it, as if the forest had grown around the building on purpose and decided to keep it. Stepping out of the car, the silence hit harder. Not the peaceful kind, the kind that feels staged, manufactured, a silence that feels like waiting. The others explored the area, stretching, laughing, claiming rooms, stepping on the creaking floorboards as if everything was normal. But the longer I stood there, the more I sensed it. The place felt occupied. Not by animals or people, something more abstract, like the weight of countless moments that had happened here long before us, leaving an imprint on the air. Inside the cabin, the scent of old wood, dust, and something faintly metallic clung to the walls. The windows were narrow and uneven, struggling to pull in the late afternoon light. Every corner looked darker than it should have been, as if shadows had settled there for good. I tried to shake the feeling off, blaming the drive, the remoteness, the exhaustion. But the unease didn't leave. It just moved deeper, settling behind my ribs like a slow heartbeat. By sunset, we were unpacked, gathered, relaxed enough to pretend everything was fine. But I remember looking out the window at the last slice of daylight, sinking behind the tree line, and realizing something unsettling. I couldn't tell if the forest was growing darker because night was falling, or because it wanted us there. And for the first time that day, a thought whispered through me with cold clarity. One of us shouldn't have come. Night didn't fall over the cabin so much as it collapsed. One moment, the tree line was outlined in dull orange light. The next, everything outside the windows had dissolved into a thick, impenetrable black that seemed to press its forehead against the glass. Even with the lamps on, the interior felt dimmer than before, like the darkness outside was stealing something from the bulbs before the light could settle on the walls. I felt it most clearly when I stepped onto the porch alone for a moment, trying to get a breath of fresh air. The forest was silent in a way that wasn't natural. No insects, no wind, no rustling branches. Just a dense, unbroken stillness, the kind that doesn't happen in a place alive with wildlife. It felt staged, intentional, as if the entire forest were holding its breath and waiting for something only it knew was coming. When I glanced back toward the window, I could see my friends moving inside, 10 silhouettes crossing hallways, unpacking snacks, adjusting speakers, spreading blankets, carving out their comfort zones in a place that didn't want comfort. Their shapes shifted against the dim, amber glow of the cabin lights, but something about the way the shadows moved made my skin tighten. Some outlines felt too sharp, Others seemed to lag behind the bodies casting them, like the darkness was slow to react. The cabin creaked often, but it didn't sound like wood settling. It sounded like responses, soft, long groans that traveled through the walls in ways I couldn't map, as if something unseen was pacing from one end of the building to the other, choosing which spaces to linger in. At some point, a tension settled into the group, not enough to comment on, but enough that everyone felt it. Movements became quieter, footsteps lighter. People checked over their shoulders more often than necessary. The laughter sounded thinner, stretched, like it had to fight through the air to be heard. Before midnight, I caught myself counting us. 10. Still 10. Still here. Still fine. The repetition didn't soothe me. It made the number feel fragile, temporary, as if it were floating above us, waiting to drop at the slightest touch. I went to bed last, unable to shake the sensation that sleep wasn't a good idea. That unconsciousness meant vulnerability, and vulnerability was a mistake in a place like this. The cabin's hallway was unnervingly narrow, lined with doors that looked too old to close properly. When I passed each one, the darkness inside felt like a different temperature, a different thickness, a different mood entirely. When I finally lay down, the mattress felt colder than the rest of the room. The walls around me breathed, expanding and contracting with long, slow groans. My heartbeat fell into rhythm with the sounds, syncing with the building itself. I tried closing my eyes, but the dark behind my eyelids felt too similar to the dark outside, heavy, watchful, full of corners where thoughts could hide. Sleep didn't come. Not really. Only fragments of drifting consciousness, anchored to the certainty that something was moving in the house. Not walking, not creeping, just repositioning, as if rearranging itself for the night. And somewhere between one shallow breath and the next, a realization settled over me with a cold finality. We were no longer 10 people sharing a cabin. We were 10 potential outcomes waiting to be claimed. I woke up without remembering when I'd fallen asleep. The kind of awakening that doesn't feel earned, but extracted like my consciousness had been forced back into place before I was ready. The room was colder, the air denser, and the silence thicker than anything I'd felt the night before. At first, I thought the unease came from me. Then I noticed something was wrong with the hallway. The door across from mine was open, wide open. That wouldn't have been strange if I hadn't watched it being closed hours earlier, the wood dragging loudly across the warped frame. Now it stood frozen in a perfect angle, as though someone had placed it with care. Too intentional, too clean. I stepped into the hallway, and the air hit me with a temperature drop sharp enough to sting. Dust floated lazily in the thin strip of morning light, leaking from a small window, and in that beam I noticed something subtle but unmistakable. The dust wasn't moving randomly. It drifted toward the open doorway, as if being pulled. Inside the room, the bedsheets were tangled, but not in the casual way someone leaves them after a night's sleep. They were twisted violently toward the edge, almost as if the mattress had been dragged. A backpack lay open on the floor, its contents spilled in a pattern that didn't make sense, not scattered, not overturned, but placed in a strange, careful arc. Clothes pointing toward the window. A phone drained of battery but sitting screen up, as if expecting attention. But what struck me most was the feeling that the room hadn't been left. It had been emptied. I waited for one of the others to laugh, to jump from behind a corner and reveal this as some dumb prank, the kind of thing that a group of 10 could pull off to shake off the tension, but the house offered nothing. No footsteps, no voices, only the hum of electrical wires behind the walls, vibrating faintly like distant insects. When the others began to notice the missing presence, the shift in atmosphere was immediate, a quiet panic, not spoken, not acknowledged, but heavy in the air. People paced. People checked their phones even without signal. People opened and closed doors as if the repetition would reveal something new. 9. The number floated through the cabin like a whisper no one wanted to admit hearing. We searched the property, moving in a loose formation, but no one dared step too far from the group. The trees stood impossibly still, vertical pillars stretching into an endless grid that hid everything and revealed nothing. There were no footprints leading away, no broken branches, no impressions in the grass. The ground looked undisturbed, untouched, indifferent. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere changed again, not louder, not frantic, just thinner. Conversations, if they could be called that, came in shallow breaths. Everyone stayed in sight of everyone else, as if proximity alone could guarantee safety. But what unsettled me most wasn't the disappearance. It was the realization that no one questioned the possibility that this wasn't an accident. Not even for a second. Fear didn't enter the group gradually. It arrived already formed, perfectly shaped, as if it had been waiting for this opening. 9. Still 9. But the number no longer felt stable. It felt temporary, preparatory. Somewhere within the cabin, behind a wall, in a shadow, in a thought, the first fracture had appeared. And wherever the missing one had gone, whatever had taken them or whoever had made them vanish, it wasn't finished. Not even close. I woke up without remembering when I'd fallen asleep. The kind of awakening that doesn't feel earned, but extracted, like my consciousness had been forced back into place before I was ready. The room was colder, the air denser, and the silence thicker than anything I'd felt the night before. At first, I thought the unease came from me. Then I noticed something was wrong with the hallway. The door across from mine was open, wide open. That wouldn't have been strange if I hadn't watched it being closed hours earlier, the wood dragging loudly across the warped frame. Now it stood frozen in a perfect angle, as though someone had placed it with care. Too intentional, too clean. I stepped into the hallway, and the air hit me with a temperature drop sharp enough to sting. Dust floated lazily in the thin strip of morning light, leaking from a small window, and in that beam I noticed something subtle but unmistakable. The dust wasn't moving randomly. It drifted toward the open doorway, as if being pulled. Inside the room, the bed sheets were tangled, but not in the casual way someone leaves them after a night's sleep. They were twisted violently toward the edge, almost as if the mattress had been dragged. A backpack lay open on the floor, its contents spilled in a pattern that didn't make sense, not scattered, not overturned, but placed in a strange, careful arc. Clothes pointing toward the window. A phone drained of battery but sitting screen up, as if expecting attention. But what struck me most was the feeling that the room hadn't been left. It had been emptied. I waited for one of the others to laugh, to jump from behind a corner and reveal this as some dumb prank, the kind of thing that a group of 10 could pull off to shake off the tension, but the house offered nothing. No footsteps, no voices, only the hum of electrical wires behind the walls, vibrating faintly like distant insects. When the others began to notice the missing presence, the shift in atmosphere was immediate, a quiet panic, not spoken, not acknowledged, but heavy in the air. People paced. People checked their phones even without signal. People opened and closed doors, as if the repetition would reveal something new. 9. The number floated through the cabin like a whisper no one wanted to admit hearing. We searched the property, moving in a loose formation, but no one dared step too far from the group. The trees stood impossibly still, vertical pillars stretching into an endless grid that hid everything and revealed nothing. There were no footprints leading away, no broken branches, no impressions in the grass. The ground looked undisturbed, untouched, indifferent. Back at the cabin, the atmosphere changed again, not louder, not frantic, just thinner. Conversations, if they could be called that, came in shallow breaths. Everyone stayed in sight of everyone else, as if proximity alone could guarantee safety. But what unsettled me most wasn't the disappearance. It was the realization that no one questioned the possibility that this wasn't an accident. Not even for a second. Fear didn't enter the group gradually. It arrived already formed, perfectly shaped, as if it had been waiting for this opening. 9. Still 9. But the number no longer felt stable. It felt temporary, preparatory. Somewhere within the cabin, behind a wall, in a shadow, in a thought, the first fracture had appeared. And wherever the missing one had gone, whatever had taken them or whoever had made them vanish, it wasn't finished. Not even close. The hours after the disappearance stretched in a way time isn't supposed to stretch. Morning should have brought clarity, but instead it felt diluted, as if the light itself had been filtered through something dense and unseen. The cabin no longer resembled the place we had entered the day before. It felt smaller, narrower, more aware. Everyone moved through it differently now, slower, closer to the walls, almost careful not to disturb whatever invisible balance held the place together. The building creaked constantly, but not from the natural cooling and warming of old wood. The sounds traveled in deliberate paths, following us from room to room like something moving within the skeleton of the house. Pulsing, observing. 9 bodies still inhabited the space, but the absence of the 10th weighed more than a presence ever could. You don't realize how much space one person takes up until they're gone, until the silence they leave behind begins to reshape the layout of a place. I watched the others without meaning to. Their movements, the tension in their shoulders, the way their eyes darted around corners before committing to a step. Fear wasn't just settling over us, it was carving itself into our posture, into our breathing, into the unspoken knowledge that whatever happened during the night hadn't finished unfolding. Around noon, something shifted again. A dull thump echoed deep inside the cabin, not loud, but heavy, like something soft falling from a height and hitting old floorboards. No one reacted with surprise, which disturbed me more than the sound itself. As if all of us had been waiting for it. As if we had already accepted the possibility that the cabin might respond to us. We checked the rooms in a loose, disjointed line. No one wanted to be first. No one wanted to be last. The thump had come from the far end of the hallway, near a storage closet with a warped door that never closed properly. The air near it felt cooler, as if something had just passed through. When the door was nudged open, nothing obvious was inside, just boxes, coats, an old broom leaning against the wall. But the broom wasn't where it had been the day before. It was angled strangely, pointed outward, as if someone had used it recently and placed it back in haste. A thin smear of dark soil marked the handle, trailing down to the bristles. No one claimed to have touched it. No one looked each other in the eyes long enough to challenge that. The group splintered after that, not physically, but mentally. People hovered close, yet seemed isolated, each trapped in their own private interpretation of danger. Some stared out the windows, searching for movement in the tree line. Others paced in repetitive paths, as if unable to remain still long enough for thoughts to settle. The air thickened with paranoia, not wild, frantic paranoia, but the cold, silent kind that grows in corners and feeds on uncertainty. The cabin began to feel alive in a way that didn't rely on sound. There were moments when the floorboards seemed to shift beneath my feet, rising slightly, as if something underneath adjusted its position. The walls had an almost imperceptible hum, a vibration I felt more in my bones than in my ears. And the door frames didn't seem perfectly aligned anymore, some tilted by a degree or two, barely noticeable unless you stared long enough. By late afternoon, I found myself instinctively by the time darkness began to settle over the lake again, something in the group had broken, not loudly, not in an argument, but quietly, like a beam inside the cabin giving way under too much weight. You couldn't hear the snap, but you could feel the shift that followed the subtle drop in stability, the new angle at which everything balanced. 8 people under one roof. But nothing about us felt whole anymore. We stayed together in the living room for a while, sitting in an uneven circle that kept expanding and contracting as if no one wanted to stay in one place too long. The shadows cast by the lamps stretched across the floor in thin, uneasy lines, creating little pockets of darkness between us. Every time someone shifted, the shadows crawled in a new direction, forming shapes that looked almost purposeful. I watched the others with a clarity I hadn't felt before, not because I wanted to, but because my mind was now trained to detect the smallest irregularity. Someone breathed too shallowly. Someone blinked too often. Someone stood too close to the wall, almost leaning into it as if trying to merge with something solid. The silence between us wasn't normal. It had rhythm, weight, intention. The house was listening, and we were performing without meaning to. The fear had mutated. It wasn't about disappearing anymore. It was about who might cause the next disappearance. At some point, people began pairing off instinctively, creating loose alliances without a word. A tiny shift in body orientation, a subtle step closer to one person and farther from another. No one openly accused anyone, there were no words at all, but the tension between us screamed louder than any confrontation could have. I noticed myself doing it too, choosing who I stood near, who I trusted to stay within arm's reach, who I made sure never to turn my back on. Even the cabin seemed to respond to the shift. The walls vibrated with low creaks, almost thoughtful, like they were absorbing our fear and redistributing it evenly. The air had a strange density, as if we were breathing something thicker than oxygen, something saturated with human suspicion. When the lamps flickered, the group froze at the exact same moment, 8 bodies in synchronized fear, 8 pairs of eyes widening with the same realization. The house wasn't malfunctioning. It was reacting. I found myself counting again, obsessively, needing the number as a tether to reality. 8. Still 8. But the number didn't soothe me. It accused me. It accused all of us. As the night deepened, the temperature dropped sharply. The cabin's wooden frame contracted with soft, hollow pops like knuckles cracking in the walls. No wind blew outside. No animals moved. No branches rustled. The whole forest was holding position, leaving only our breaths to disturb the air. When someone stood to go refill their water bottle, the entire room tensed. Every head lifted, every eye tracked the movement. No one trusted anyone to be alone, not even for a single step. But even with 8 people watching, even with attention sharpened to a painful degree, the paranoia didn't ease. It grew. Because for the first time, a thought slid cold and unwelcome into my mind, a thought I hadn't let myself consider until that moment. If the threat was inside the group, the killer wasn't hiding in shadows. He was hiding in plain sight. And the scariest part wasn't trying to figure out who it was. It was realizing that the killer already knew exactly who his next target would be, and that nothing we did could change his choice. No one planned to split up. It just happened the way cracks spread across glass. Slowly at first, then all at once, without anyone realizing when the structure stopped being stable. The tension inside the cabin became unbearable. 8 people packed into a room that felt too small, too warm, too charged with suspicion. Every breath felt like it disturbed the equilibrium. Every shift in posture made someone flinch. Eventually, the pressure pushed us apart, not far, just far enough for danger to slip between us. I ended up in the hallway, leaning against the wall, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. The floor beneath me buzzed faintly, almost like a pulse traveling through the wood. I didn't know if the cabin was actually vibrating or if my nerves had finally started to betray me. The air had grown colder again, but not evenly. There were pockets of warmth and pockets of cold, as if the temperature followed something moving just out of sight. I heard a faint creak, light, deliberate, almost polite. It came from deeper in the cabin. A door closing. Softly. Too softly. I didn't move for several seconds. My body refused. Everything in me understood. instinctively, that another disappearance had just been set in motion. When I finally stepped forward, the hallway felt longer than before, stretched like the cabin was rearranging itself. Shadows close to the ground looked thicker, clinging to the corners. The air smelled faintly of damp earth and old fabric. I reached the end of the hall. A door that had been closed earlier was now open just a fraction, barely noticeable unless you stared. A thin sliver of darkness leaked through the gap like smoke. The room beyond was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels sculpted. 7. The number pressed itself against my mind before I even stepped inside. Something about the scene told me the person hadn't walked out on their own. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no frantic claw marks on the floor. Instead, the room had a subtle disarray, a chair angled slightly away from the desk, a lamp still glowing weakly, illuminating a narrow rectangle of floor where dust had been disturbed. And then I saw it. A detail so small, so easy to miss, and yet so devastatingly deliberate. A sock lying in the middle of the floor, curled, compressed, as if someone had gripped it tightly in their fist before dropping it, not kicked off, not tossed aside, held, and then left behind. It didn't belong there. It wasn't the kind of thing anyone leaves by accident. It was a marker, a quiet signature. 7 people left. The realization didn't hit like fear. It hit like inevitability. When I returned to the others, the atmosphere had thickened into something close to dread. They looked at me not with curiosity, not with hope, but with resignation. They already knew. You could see it in their eyes. The third silence had already seeped into them before anyone spoke, before anyone explained. No one cried. No one screamed. No one even asked what happened. We simply rearranged ourselves again, 7 bodies forming a misshapen circle, as if our instinct was to huddle, but our paranoia refused to let us get too close. I kept counting. 7. Still 7. But the number was starting to feel less like a count of survivors and more like a countdown. Because with each disappearance, something became clearer, too clear to ignore. The killer wasn't escalating. He was following a plan, and we were moving exactly where he wanted us. By the time night folded itself over the cabin again, the atmosphere had changed so drastically that I barely recognized the place. The building no longer felt like an old structure creaking under its own weight. It felt animate, responsive, a quiet participant observing us with something close to curiosity. 7 of us remained, but the number didn't feel solid. It felt unstable. It felt like a borrowed moment. We gathered in the main room again, though gathered was generous. No one stood too close, no one sat for long, no one let their guard down in any direction. The room felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate, like the proportions had subtly shifted. The ceiling seemed lower, the walls seemed tighter. Light from the lamps pooled only in small, reluctant circles, leaving wide stretches of the room in a diluted gloom. Every sound felt amplified. A footstep on the floorboards, a breath drawn too sharply, the rustle of a sleeve brushing against skin. Even silence had a presence layering itself over our bodies like something heavy and cold. At some point, the temperature dropped abruptly, not gradually, but like a switch flipping. A shiver moved through the room as the cold settled into the space behind us, creeping into corners and spreading along the floor like fog. The lamps flickered, not from electricity, but as if the air itself interfered with the light. That's when I heard it. A low, almost imperceptible exhale from somewhere within the walls. Not a gust of wind, not a settling of wood. A breath, a slow, patient breath, long and deliberate, as if the house itself inhaled our fear and exhaled something colder in return. The others felt it too. I saw shoulders tighten, eyes widen, bodies shift slightly closer to the center of the room. No one acknowledged it, but acknowledgement wasn't necessary. The sound had rolled through the floorboards, through the wall studs, through whatever existed beneath the cabin's surface. The building felt alive and aware. The cold grew sharper, settling most strongly near one of the interior doors, a door that led to a narrow back corridor none of us had explored fully. The shadows on that side of the room deepened, stretching upward like long, thin fingers curling along the grain of the wood. Someone moved toward the light switch, maybe thinking brighter illumination would help, but the overhead bulb flickered violently the moment their hand neared it, a stuttering pulse of light that cast our shadows in frantic, warped shapes before dying back to a faint, unreliable glow. We froze again. The cabin exhaled a second time. Longer. Closer. I felt the shift in pressure, a subtle pull in the air, like something behind the walls had drawn near enough to taste the moment. The floor beneath us vibrated, faintly at first, then more insistently, as if something deep below was shifting its weight. But it wasn't the vibrations that terrified me. It was the realization that this was no supernatural phenomenon, no haunting, no entity lurking beyond our understanding. It was breathing because someone was moving, someone alive, someone physical, someone inside the cabin. The killer wasn't only among us, he was navigating the space in ways that suggested he knew the building better than we did. The walls weren't responding out of mystique, they were responding because someone used them, passed through them, leaned against them, followed us from the other side. 7 of us remained. But for the first time, the number wasn't what anchored my thoughts. What anchored them was a realization far more chilling. The house wasn't alive, but the person inside it was, and he was using its bones as his own. Sleep was no longer a possibility. Not with the cabin reacting to every shift in our breathing, not with the walls carrying whispers of movement we couldn't pinpoint, not with 7 of us pretending we weren't waiting to become 6. No one said anything we hadn't spoken in hours yet. The silence was full of communication. Fear communicates without words, suspicion even more so. I paced the hallway slowly, measuring every step, feeling each vibration in the floorboards beneath my feet. At first, I thought the trembling came from my own pulse. But the more I focused on it, the more I realized the vibrations weren't synced with me. They had their own rhythm, their own heartbeat, almost like footsteps somewhere deeper in the structure. Steady, slow, intentional. I stopped at the first bedroom door, one of the empty ones. The air leaking from the gap beneath it was colder than the rest of the hallway. When I leaned down, the cold hit my face like a subtle warning, not threatening, but acknowledging. The room remembered what happened there. The absence still lingered like a stain that didn't want to fade. I moved on. At the second empty room, the cold was worse. Sharper, more concentrated, as though the void inside it had thickened with time. I counted the remaining doors. 7 people. 7 possible spaces. 7 shifting shadows. The number echoed again in my mind, not as a tally, but as a pattern. I stepped into the living room, where the others hovered in vague clusters. Their silhouettes looked stretched, elongated by the dim light. The shadows between them were darker than before, compressed like something was hiding in their density. We weren't just missing people. We were missing logic. And then it hit me suddenly, brutally, a realization that felt like someone pressed fingers into the back of my skull. Every disappearance had happened when one specific person was unaccounted for. Not for long, just for moments. Small gaps, tiny absences. Absences I hadn't paid attention to until now. Someone had always been slightly out of frame, always returning casually, always blending back into the group as though nothing had shifted. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't the forest. It wasn't the cabin. It was deliberate, planned, calculated. The killer wasn't choosing targets randomly, he was working through a list, a sequence only he understood. But his movements weren't erratic or emotional, they were controlled, the way someone behaves when following steps they've rehearsed long before the moment arrives. A hidden plan, a hidden motive, a hidden rage. My breath trembled, but my thoughts sharpened. I scanned the room, looking not for fear, but for stillness, the kind that belongs to someone who knows he is untouchable, at least until he decides otherwise. And then I saw it. A calm posture where panic should have been. A steady expression where dread filled every other face. Eyes that didn't dart around. Eyes that tracked us. Not searching for reassurance, but measuring, evaluating, selecting. For one horrifying moment, our gazes met just briefly, and something inside that look froze me in place. Not guilt, not fear, not regret. Recognition. He knew that I knew, and worse, he didn't care. 6 wasn't the next number. It was the next step, and I realized with a coldness that drained the warmth from my chest. He wasn't waiting for an opportunity. He was creating them, one by one, room by room, silence by silence. And the next silence was already on its way. After the realization in the living room, the air inside the cabin changed again, not in temperature, not in sound, but in pressure. It felt as if the walls had leaned closer, shrinking the space between us, forcing us to exist in a tighter, more suffocating frame. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips, in my teeth, in the back of my eyes. 7 of us still stood in that room, but only one felt in control. The rest of us hovered near furniture, near walls, near corners, anywhere that gave the illusion of stability. The killer didn't need weapons or noise or confrontation. He had something more powerful: the space, the timing, the fear that made every second unpredictable. At some point, one of us drifted toward the kitchen. It wasn't a dramatic separation, just a small, natural movement, a step for water, for air, for anything that felt like normality. None of us stopped them. None of us dared to. The cabin had become a place where even the slightest interference felt dangerous. A soft sound followed a moment later, barely audible. A dull shuffle, not a crash, not a struggle, just the kind of sound a body makes when leaving a room. No one reacted at first. I think we were too afraid to acknowledge what that sound meant, too conditioned by the previous disappearances to trust our instincts. We all stared into the dim, pulsing glow of the living room, pretending not to hear what we had just heard. Then the silence deepened, expanded, settled. 7 became 6. No one needed to say it. The absence announced itself the way all the others had, through the sudden emptiness in the air, through the shift in atmosphere, through the way the space where they had stood felt colder now, thinner, like breath had been removed from it. I approached the kitchen with slow, measured steps. The floor felt softer under my feet, like the boards were reacting to the tension in my body. The kitchen light flickered, but didn't go out. A faint hum vibrated through the counters, the fridge, the walls, a background noise that sounded almost like faint whispering. The room was empty. The only sign of the missing person was a chair slightly pulled back from the table, angled strangely toward the doorway. Not a sign of struggle, not a sign of haste. Just a subtle misalignment, as if someone had been sitting there but never pushed it back in. Next to it, a glass of water sat on the counter, half full, condensation sliding down the sides. Still cold. Whoever took them hadn't needed time, hadn't needed force, hadn't even needed silence. Just opportunity. 6. It echoed in my mind again like a heartbeat. 6. Still 6. I stepped closer to the table and noticed another detail, something almost invisible unless you squinted. A faint drag mark on the wooden floor, short, clean, leading toward the far end of the cabin. Not toward a door, not toward the outside, toward the hallway, toward the bedrooms, toward the places where the walls seemed to breathe hardest. My stomach tightened. The killer wasn't just moving through the cabin. He was guiding us, positioning us, using the layout like a predator familiar with every corridor, every room, every blind spot. He knew exactly where we'd look, where we'd panic, where we'd try to regroup. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. When I returned to the living room, the others were staring at me with wide, hollow eyes. They already understood. They felt the shift too, not just in numbers, but in the killer's confidence. 6 left. But for the first time, it didn't feel like we were losing people. It felt like he was herding us towards something. A point, a moment, an ending he had planned long before we ever set foot in this cabin. And deep in my bones, I knew the next disappearance wouldn't be quiet. The next one would be the first move toward the final act. 6 of us remained, but the cabin no longer felt like a place meant for 6 people. It felt like a structure sculpted for something else entirely. After the 4th disappearance, the atmosphere tightened around us like invisible hands closing slowly around a throat. Each breath felt thinner. Each movement felt watched. The space between our bodies was no longer just distance, it was danger, calculation, opportunity. The living room, once the safest place we could gather, had become a stage too exposed, lit by a dim bulb that hummed like it was straining under the weight of everything happening in its glow. Shadows pooled thickly along the walls, merging with the corners, making the room feel smaller with each passing minute. No one sat anymore. Sitting felt vulnerable. Sitting meant giving up. Instead, we hovered, pacing, adjusting our weight, staying alert, waiting for the next fracture in the group. But something else was changing, something subtle and deeply wrong. The house was adjusting to the shrinking number. At first, it was small things, the floorboards creaking closer to where we stood, the air pressure shifting in pockets that formed and dissolved without explanation. Then the changes became more unmistakable. The temperature changed room by room, not like a draft or poor insulation, but like the cabin was focusing its cold on specific areas, cycling through them in a rhythm I didn't understand. The lights dimmed not randomly, but in sync with our movements, brightening when we clustered, dulling when someone drifted even a few steps away. And the walls were no longer just boundaries. They had become conduits. Every vibration, every breath, every subtle scrape traveled through them, as if the structure were carrying messages from room to room. I could feel movement without hearing it, the faintest shift of weight, the most delicate footstep, traveling through the wooden frame like whispers through bone. The killer was using the cabin like a second body. At some point, one of the remaining group members stepped toward the window, not to look outside, but to create distance, to breathe, to think. The moment they crossed the boundary of light into the dimmer space near the glass, the house responded. The boards beneath their feet sighed, not loudly, not violently, but with a softness that made every hair on my neck stand up. It was the kind of sound a predator makes when shifting weight, preparing to move. We all froze. All 6. The air thickened, dense and cold, as if the walls themselves held their breath. The person near the window backed away slowly, rejoining the rest of us. The moment they returned to the light, the cabin relaxed again, the walls releasing tension with a faint groan, the bulb above us flickering back to a steady glow. That was when I understood something crucial. The killer didn't need to improvise. The environment itself was helping him, not by magic, not by intelligence, but by familiarity. He knew which floorboards creaked. He knew which shadows swallowed movement. He knew which pockets of cold masked sound. He knew which rooms distorted footsteps and which amplified whispers. This place wasn't just a hunting ground. It was home to him in ways it never could be for us. 6 remained, but we weren't 6 individuals anymore. We were 6 variables in a system he engineered, 6 pieces on a board where every square favored the same player. And as the night thickened, as the walls settled into another long, slow groan, I felt something new whisper through the structure. The killer wasn't waiting for us to panic. He was waiting for the exact moment we believed panic was our only choice. Because once that moment came, the next disappearance wouldn't be a quiet one. It would be the first strike in a collapse he'd been designing all along. 6 bodies, 6 breaths, 6 shadows trembling under the thin glow of the cabin lights. But by the time night settled fully, it no longer felt like 6 people were trapped in that place. It felt like the cabin itself was filling with something else, something invisible, expanding, pressing into our lungs, thinning the oxygen until thinking became work. We were no longer reacting to danger. We were anticipating it. And anticipation is the stage where panic quietly prepares its teeth. I stood near the center of the living room, feeling the boards beneath me shift in tiny, rhythmic pulses far too controlled to be natural. The vibrations traveled from beneath my feet through my legs, settling deep into my spine. It wasn't loud enough to hear, but unmistakable enough to feel. Someone was moving below us. Not crawling, walking. Slow, patient, measured steps. The killer wasn't just familiar with the cabin, he was inside its structure, using the crawl space or the gaps between old supports the way someone uses hallways. Each subtle thump, each faint scrape, traveled beneath us like a quiet announcement. He was choosing the next opening. The others felt it too. One person backed against the wall and slid slowly to the floor, drawing their knees to their chest, shaking in silence. Another stood rigid near the doorway, their stare fixed on a single point in the wooden floor, as if expecting it to crack open. No one spoke. There were no whispers, no plans, no leadership. Just fear, thick and suffocating. The lights flickered again, not randomly, not from failing electricity, but in a pattern. A slow dim, then a pause, then another dim, slightly longer, then a brief flare of brightness. It felt like the cabin was signaling something, or responding to something inside its bones. I scanned the room. Someone was missing. Not gone. Just not visible. Hidden behind the small dividing wall near the hallway, in a recess meant for coats and shoes. At first, I thought they were simply trying to stay within view of everyone, but the position was too tight, the angle too unnatural. The shadows around them didn't fall correctly. The light didn't touch them the way it should. Then I understood. They weren't hiding. They were avoiding attention, watching us, watching responses, watching fear settle. My chest tightened, my pulse thundering in my throat. It wasn't the killer. I recognized the silhouette, but the posture told me something far more dangerous. Paranoia had started to fracture someone's sanity, and a fractured mind inside a shrinking group could be as dangerous as the killer himself. The cabin groaned, suddenly deep, resonant, vibrating through the walls. The sound rolled through the living room like a warning. The person in the recess jolted, jerking forward, practically stumbling into the room. We all turned toward the noise. At the exact same moment, and in that perfect synchronization, the killer acted. A hollow thud echoed from down the hallway. Then another. Then a third. 3 soft impacts. Rhythmic. Measured. They didn't sound like footsteps. They sounded like something heavy tapping on the floorboards deliberately, almost tauntingly. One of the group panicked. They bolted toward the hallway, desperate, irrational, acting on instinct rather than thought. The rest of us froze, unable to stop them, unable to process fast enough what that movement meant. The moment they crossed into the darker corridor, the air pressure changed. A burst of cold pushed into the room like a breath reversing direction. The shadows in the hallway seemed to thicken, pulling the fleeing figure forward as if the darkness itself guided them. A final thump. Softer this time. Then silence. 5. I didn't need to check. None of us did. The house felt different immediately, lighter in one direction, heavier in another, as though it were redistributing the burden of presence. The killer wasn't speeding up. He wasn't improvising. He was nudging us, applying stress, fragmenting us psychologically, until one by one, we made ourselves vulnerable. This wasn't a hunt. It was a controlled descent. And now that we were 5, the pattern felt clearer than ever. He wasn't removing people at random. He was shaping the group he wanted for the final act. 5 of us remained, but it didn't feel like 5 survivors. It felt like 5 fragments of something that had already broken. After the collapse in the hallway, no one moved for a long time. We stood suspended in the middle of the living room, breathing unevenly, every inhale shallow and trembling. No one dared look down the corridor. No one dared acknowledge the new silence that had entered the cabin, an emptiness we all felt but none of us could face. The atmosphere thickened again, more suffocating than before. Not just fear, resignation. A collective understanding that whatever was happening wasn't accidental, wasn't chaotic, wasn't supernatural, it was engineered, crafted by someone who knew exactly what fear does to human behavior. 5 bodies left, and each one responded differently. One person shook uncontrollably, gripping the edge of a table as if anchoring themselves to the world. Another pressed both palms to their temples, eyes squeezed shut, trapped in some internal spiral that seemed far worse than the physical danger surrounding us. But one member of the group stood unnervingly still. Not calm, not brave. Still. The type of stillness that doesn't arise from control, but from knowing, from being several psychological steps ahead of the rest of us. From observing instead of reacting, calculating instead of panicking. A stillness that didn't fit the pattern of prey. I forced myself to look away before my thoughts betrayed their shape. The floor vibrated again, not as footsteps this time, but as pressure, an uneven shift in the boards beneath us. The building felt unstable, as if the weight inside it opposed our presence. Every tremor rolled toward the center of the room, compressing us into a smaller space, pushing the 5 of us closer together whether we liked it or not. The lamps flickered in rapid succession, left side of the room, then right, then back again. 3 flickers. A pause. 3 more flickers. A pattern. He was communicating. Not to us, about us. The shadows on the walls lengthened again, but differently this time. Not stretching downward or sideways, but upward, as though the darkness were rising from the floor, rather than sinking from the ceiling. It made the walls seem taller, the ceiling farther away, the entire room shifting in scale. Someone whispered a breathless sound, not words, just a raw exhale of panic, and stumbled backward. The boards beneath them groaned in response, vibrating with a resonance that made the cabin feel almost sentient. Then the cold returned. Not like before. Sharper, more focused. The temperature dropped in one specific part of the room behind us, near a narrow storage alcove. The cold wasn't spreading, it was concentrating, forming a thin, vertical column of chill, like someone invisible was standing there. I turned slowly, and I saw it. A faint indentation on the wooden floor. Not deep, not dramatic. Just enough to show weight. Just enough to say someone had been standing there moments before. Too recent for dust to settle. Too precise to be accidental. The killer had been in the room with us. Not behind a wall. Not under the floorboards. Not hidden in the dark. Inside the same space, breathing the same air, only inches from where we stood. The shock wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was internal, cold, sinking, irreversible. 5 people remained, but it no longer felt like the killer was picking us off one by one. It felt like he was waiting not for opportunity, but for alignment, for the moment when the psychological tension molded the group into the exact configuration he needed. A configuration with one person unraveling, one person collapsing inward, one person hypervigilant, one person frozen in dread, and one who watched the rest of us fall apart with eyes too still. The circle was tightening. The pattern was almost complete. And deep down, beneath fear and shock and denial, I understood the truth that the cabin had been whispering to us since the beginning. We weren't just approaching the final act. We were being arranged for it. 5 of us remained, but the number no longer felt like a count, it felt like a diagnosis. A stage in an illness spreading through the cabin, thinning the boundary between sanity and collapse. The air tasted metallic, like old nails pressed against the tongue. The walls didn't just creak now, they shifted, redistributing tension the way a body adjusts after holding its breath too long. The cabin wasn't shrinking. We were. Fear compresses people, squeezes them into smaller versions of themselves. And the killer knew exactly how small we had become. The silence grew so dense, it felt like it had weight, an invisible pressure lowering itself onto our shoulders. Every inhale was a struggle, not because the air was thin, but because the walls around us seemed to absorb sound, as though the cabin was swallowing our existence piece by piece. Then someone cracked. Not loudly, not violently. They just slid downward, knees folding, palms pressed to the floorboards as if trying to steady the world. Their breath came in shallow, frantic pulls. The sound echoed faintly, as if the cabin wanted us to listen. Another person tried to pull them upright, but even that attempt trembled with desperation, a movement tainted by the fear of touching another human being. The killer watched. Not obviously, not openly, but I could feel it, the presence of someone measuring all of us, studying the edges of our unraveling. He wasn't hiding behind a door or slipping through the floorboards at that moment. He was right there in the room, wearing fear like a mask so convincingly that none of us dared confront the wrong person. 5 people, 1 threat, and no way to distinguish one from the other. The lamps dimmed again, but this time they didn't flicker back to full brightness. They held the low glow, like a candle burning through its last patch of oxygen. The room dipped into a twilight that felt unnatural, too dark for the time of night, too selective in the way it clung to certain corners. The shadows thickened near the hallway entrance, forming a heavy band of darkness that looked like it was breathing. Not in, not out, just pulsing, as if the space itself had a heartbeat. The floorboards beneath that darkness showed faint impressions in the wood. Footprints, fresh ones, facing inward. Someone had stood there, recently, watching us, waiting. A shiver crawled from the base of my spine to the back of my skull. I stepped backward, instinctively, even though I knew stepping away changed nothing. The killer wasn't tied to shadows or rooms, he was tied to opportunity. One person suddenly broke away from the group again, not by choice, but by instinct. They stumbled toward the far wall, clutching their chest, their breath sharp and erratic. The psychological pressure had finally ruptured something inside them. The others moved reflexively, one reaching out in concern, another stepping forward in confusion, and the killer moved with them. Not visibly, not detectably, but I felt the shift in the room. A change in weight distribution, a breath misaligned with the others, a calmness so out of sync with the panic that it froze my limbs. Someone stepped out of the dim light and into the gloom. Not far, just enough. And that was all the killer needed. A soft sound echoed, not a scream, not a thud, just a muffled drag, like fabric brushing against wood. One of the group lurched, but only for a moment, as if pulled by something unseen. Their hand stretched outward, fingers trembling, reaching instinctively for help that came too late. The movement was so quiet, it almost didn't exist. Then the shadow swallowed them. Not metaphorically, physically. The darkness near the hallway absorbed their shape, folding them inward, erasing them from sight without a single sound of struggle. The cabin exhaled. 4. The number struck me with such force that my knees weakened. I didn't need to see their face. I didn't need to check the room. The atmosphere had already confirmed everything. Someone had been taken from us while standing only a few feet away. And worse than the disappearance itself, was the realization that the killer had executed it without disturbing the fragile balance of the room. He didn't need chaos. He needed vulnerability. He needed fear sharpened to the point where one misstep was enough. 4 people left. 4 shadows. 4 fragile psyches. But only one of us felt no fear at all. And that was the person we needed to find. Before he finished shaping the group for the final act, 4 of us remained. But the cabin didn't feel like it held 4 people, it felt like it held one truth tightening like a wire around our throats. Something about the disappearance in the hallway had shifted the entire structure of the night. The killer no longer moved silently through the walls or beneath the floor. He didn't need to. The psychological terrain was now shaped perfectly for him, carved by fear, polished by panic, sharpened by the dread that bloomed inside each of us. It was no longer about thinning the group. It was about isolating the right minds, the ones he wanted for the final confrontation. 4 bodies formed a loose square in the dim living room, each of us claiming a corner without meaning to. None of us crossed the invisible lines between those corners. None of us dared. We watched each other with eyes hollowed by sleeplessness and terror, trying to decode every twitch, every breath, every tremble. But fear distorts perception, and the killer knew that better than anyone. The air grew colder again, but this cold wasn't spreading through the cabin. It gathered behind one of us, concentrated, almost sentient, settling over them like a shadow draped across their shoulders. They didn't move, didn't flinch. The stillness was back. That same unnatural calm I had noticed hours ago. A quiet posture that didn't match the frayed nerves of a hunted person. A breathing pattern too steady, too measured, too controlled. My mind raced. Not with panic, with recognition. The pattern wasn't just in the disappearances. It was in his behavior. He had never panicked, never collapsed, never drifted toward doors or windows, never rushed forward when someone screamed, never stood too close, never too far. Always centered, always aware, always watching us fracture under the weight of our own thoughts. 4 people, but only one had been shaped by the night instead of broken by it. The realization didn't explode like a revelation. It settled, heavy, cold, final. I remembered each disappearance, the timing, the lighting, the positions of our bodies. I remembered the soft sounds, the misaligned objects in rooms, the faint drag marks, the breathing beneath the floor. He had been absent each time, not physically gone, just unaccounted for, lingering in blind spots, slipping through shadows, watching the rest of us move like pieces in a game only he understood. 4 bodies, 1 predator, 3 potential outcomes. The floor beneath us vibrated again, not from movement below, but from footsteps above. Light, deliberate, measured. He had gone upstairs earlier, not for escape, not for hiding, for positioning. He was waiting for the exact moment when paranoia forced one of us to break the invisible square and move toward the stairs to investigate, to confirm the noise, to beg for help. I felt it then, a shift in the air, a ripple in the room, a tension pulling us toward a decision. The person closest to the staircase trembled. Their foot slid backward, then forward, then paused on the threshold between light and shadow. One more step and they would be alone. One more step and the killer would strike. He had orchestrated this moment perfectly. The footsteps above, the cold behind one of us, the compression of space in the room. Everything narrowed. The lights dimmed. The cabin inhaled. The person near the stairs lifted their foot, and in that split second, the truth snapped fully into place inside me. He wasn't hunting us from the shadows anymore. He was guiding our movements with the precision of someone who had lived in this nightmare long before we ever arrived. The final act wasn't coming. It was already here. And if we didn't act in the next breath, the next sound, the next flicker of the lights, 4 would become 3. And 3 would become an ending with no survivors. This was the moment. The moment he had built everything toward. The moment the masks would fall. The moment stretched thin, fragile, trembling like a filament on the verge of snapping. 4 bodies, 4 breaths, 4 shadows trembling in the dim light. But only one of us moved. The person closest to the stairs shifted their weight forward, drawn by the footsteps above like prey responding to the pull of a predator's gravity. Fear makes you step toward danger without realizing it. Fear convinces the mind that confirmation is safer than uncertainty. That was the moment he had been waiting for. A soft creak rolled through the ceiling, so subtle, so careful. Not a warning, an invitation. The person at the stairs lifted their foot. I felt the killer's plan tightening around us like a noose. If that foot touched the first step, the group would splinter perfectly into the shapes he wanted. One person isolated and pulled upward, one collapsing inward in panic, one frozen by shock, and me, the last obstacle between him and whatever conclusion he had crafted. But something shifted, not in the cabin, not in the air, in me. Fear can be a blade sharpened against you, or it can be grasped and turned outward. In that split second, instinct overcame dread. I lunged forward, not toward the stairs, but toward the person moving into danger. My hand closed around their arm, pulling them sharply back into the light. The sudden movement shocked all of us, even the killer. The cabin reacted. The floorboards trembled, a long, angry groan spreading through the structure. The walls vibrated, not in approval, but in irritation, as though the building itself understood its script had been disrupted. The lights flickered violently, and upstairs, the footsteps stopped. Not a slow halt, not a careful pause, a freeze, an unnatural, abrupt stillness, like someone holding their breath after being caught watching. The entire cabin exhaled in a low, pulsing thump. Then I saw movement, not in the shadows, not between rooms, but in the body of one of the survivors. Their posture changed, a subtle shift of weight, a relaxation of shoulders, a stillness too composed for the moment. He knew. He realized I had broken the pattern. Interference wasn't supposed to happen. Fear was supposed to paralyze us, not push us together. The killer's carefully constructed sequence was collapsing, and he felt it. He turned toward me with an expression that didn't belong to fear or panic. It belonged to someone who had been exposed. One tiny movement, that's all it took. And the person I had pulled from the stairs understood too. Their eyes snapped wide, not with terror, but with clarity, and without words, without planning, without hesitation, the two of us moved in perfect, unspoken sync. Fear united us. Survival sharpened us. Instinct guided us. We lunged toward him. He reacted fast, faster than I expected, but not fast enough. He twisted, reaching toward the wall as though the house itself were a weapon he could wield, but the shift in momentum threw him off balance. The two of us collided with him, driving him backward. The cabin roared, creaking, shuddering, the lights strobing as if the building refused to allow this deviation from its script. But we didn't stop. 3 bodies struggling against one. The weight of terror behind our momentum. The certainty that if we failed, there would be no 3 left to count. We forced him to the floor. His limbs thrashed, wild and frantic, now everything calm and calculated replaced with raw, exposed rage. He wasn't a ghost. Not a creature from the woods. Not a supernatural presence. Just a person. A person who had planned this. A person who had thrived on our fear. A person who expected us to fold perfectly into his design. The cabin groaned one last time, long, low, defeated. And then the lights steadied. Silence fell. Not the suffocating silence of before. A clean, hollow quiet. The kind that marks the end of something terrible. We held him down until long after his strength gave out. Held him until our own muscles burned. Held him until the early light pushed through the narrow windows and painted the room with a pale, exhausted dawn. Only then did help arrive. Not mystical, not heroic. Just real authorities drawn by signals, by reports, by the trail of everything that had gone wrong in that cabin. When they pulled him from our grasp, he looked smaller, less monstrous. Just a human stripped of the illusion he had built around fear. Only 3 of us remained. But 3 was enough. 3 was survival. As we stepped outside, leaving the cabin behind, the morning air felt wrong, too open, too bright, too calm. The forest stood silent, not in threat, but in observation, as if it had witnessed every moment and now acknowledged the end. But even as I walked away, even as the cold loosened its hold from my chest, even as the sunlight touched my skin, one truth followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Fear doesn't vanish when the danger ends. It lingers in the cracks of memory, waiting, reminding you how easily a familiar face can hide a darkness you never saw coming. And I knew, even with the killer taken away, even with the night behind us, I would never stop counting.